What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. Today's episode is gonna just be me, and it's all about vibe coding and MCPs, some of the hottest technology and hottest terms today. So let's break down what we're gonna be talking about. Today, I'm gonna start with a story about this past week. I'm gonna talk about a security story about MCPs, and we're gonna jump all into how MCPs can be exploited. Then we're gonna dig into vibe coding, building from intention rather than just writing code. I'm going to talk more about MCPs, and we're going to talk about how to combine all these things together, AI, security, and MCPs to make magic happen. Roll the intro.
Who says tech can't be human?
Let's jump right into some news from last week. There was a serious vulnerability that was discovered. It was on Figma, and Figma is an amazing tool. Figma helps engineers and designers. It helps them speak a common language. It gives them a tool to translate ideas into actual code. Well, Figma has an MCP server. If you don't know what MCP is, it's Model Context Protocol. Model Context Protocol is the way that LLMs interact with other external data sources. So my LLM ChatGPT doesn't have access to my Figma unless I give it access, and I give it access through MCPs. Well, there was a serious vulnerability found in the Figma MCP server that allows anyone to remotely execute code. This happens quite a bit, where there's some vulnerability that comes out and it leads to remote code execution, but there's something different here. The difference with the Figma MCP server is that you don't need to generate shellcode or to do fancy API bypasses to trick this MCP server. All you need is natural language. You could speak a prompt, you could write a prompt, and you might be able to exploit that vulnerability in the Figma MCP server. The significance with Figma MCP server being vulnerable is it allows attackers to remotely run commands through prompts, number one. And number two is Figma is a application that runs on your desktop. There's a web app version, but a lot of designers, a lot of engineers will have the Figma application installed on their device. I'm not sure why Figma needs to run shell commands at all, and why they're not sanitizing, especially on the parts that require shell commands. So admittedly, I have used the Figma MCP server before, and I thought it was interesting because I had to go to Figma settings and enable a special setting, a developer setting that says that it's going to be opening up a port on my computer. So that is going to also increase the blast radius and my attack surface for Figma as an application on my device. But I think that the real thing underneath all of this is when you give AI system the keys to your infrastructure without strict controls, then you may be setting yourself up for a breach, and not just any type of breach, a language breach, something that doesn't require so much technical experience like we've seen in the past. If you're wondering, should you be using MCPs? The answer is yes. MCP servers are amazing. MCP clients are going to open up the world of possibilities to interact with many different data sources through a large language model. I know that we all use them. So we should invest in the technology, but we should double down on the security so we're not opening up backdoors for our systems. Next, I want to talk to you about vibe coding. There was a lot of people online saying that they bet that the Figma team vibe coded that MCP server. They might have. And I think vibe coding is getting a bad rap because it sounds like something that's not intentional. It sounds like something that isn't done by engineers or people with technical backgrounds. Well, I can tell you that I'm not a developer, but I do like to write code. I love to write code. I always have loved writing Python, and some of my Python code would make its way into production, but very rarely. A lot of my Python code would run locally on my computer and it would serve as more of a prototype as someone built a more refined solution. I think vibe coding is going to open up the world of possibilities for people like you and I that might not be developers that still want to innovate and create something new. Vibe coding is the art of writing code with LLMs. That's all it is. You're allowing the LLM to write code. The term vibe came into the picture because it is a vibe. Like, you're looking at the output and it's a vibe check. Yeah, that looks good. That's how we operate in security anyways already. We look at alerts, information, log sources, and we go off of our gut and best practices. This is the same for vibe coding. If you do have a technical background, then you're going to go off of your intuition and you're going to go off of the things that you know to be best practice. We don't know everything though. We lean on researchers, experts, and now we lean on AI even more to give us best practices. So I think in a perfect world, if someone was afraid of vibe coding, then they would just use another LLM or a second or third party to review their code and then give them some feedback. Something that I found to be significantly helpful when it comes to vibe coding is instruction, context, and going in with an intention. So let's break that down. What is an instruction? An instruction is, please write this Python application to parse virus total output. That's an instruction. Context is giving reasons as to what is this going to solve? Why is this needed? And who is this going to be serving at the end? The more context that we give the LLMs, the better it's going to be at giving us the right output back. Sometimes too much context, I'll be honest, can lead to adverse consequences, but in most cases, more context is going to be better results. When I'm giving context, especially when I'm giving several different pieces of context, I like to add in XML tags. And if you don't know what an XML tag is, think of an HTML tag. It's a caret bracket with information, like you could say caret bracket and then rules, and then list out the rules that you want the LLM to follow, and then caret bracket / rules. That's the end of the rules piece of my context for you. You can give the LLMs multiple parts of context in these brackets, and it's going to be a little bit more accurate. But no matter what, the rules and the context is going to lead to proper code, but also proper LLM output. And we're going to drop a resource here in the show notes and description so you could check out how we like to prompt the LLM here at Hacker Valley Media. In most instances, vibe coding starts with creating plans through prompts. And again, we should be using instructions and context to even generate a plan. I like to ask for a checklist from the LLM when I'm doing any type of engineering task. I ask it for a checklist because as I'm writing the code, either I'm going to go in through that checklist and check off things that are done, or I'm going to ask the LLM agent to check off items from that checklist after it's completed. So I want to give a very specific example. Let's say I wanted to vibe code a browser plugin that automatically captures 5 articles, reads them, summarizes them, and then emails me the takeaway every Friday. In vibe coding, I describe the workflow end to end, and I would do it in a conversational format. Like I mentioned, this is context and it might be instruction. So I would give some information about how I want the code to be structured. I would give it as much information about the idea. I would tell it to write JavaScript or Python or TypeScript, whatever your language of choice is, and that really is going to depend on the nature of the project and who's the end user. I'm going to ask it to connect to APIs like Gmail or Notion, depending on where I store information from these articles. And I'm going to package it for deployment because in a perfect world, I don't have to leave my laptop open all day. I could deploy it to the cloud, but I could also run it locally. This is auto engineering. There's a trade-off, of course. When you don't write the code for yourself, you don't necessarily know all the details about the libraries that you're importing, what system calls you're making, or what data might even be transmitted. So one wrong assumption can lead to a backdoor. However, that backdoor would have never existed. That application would have never existed without the idea and the notion of vibe coding. So you got to give it some props, but you also got to be careful. If you're not a fan of vibe coding or you haven't bought into the hype, it's probably because you haven't yet used Model Context Protocol, MCP. MCP is the new way that LLMs are going to interact with everything. And there's going to be other protocols that come out over time, but MCP is the starting point. MCP allows ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini to access tools like HubSpot, VirusTotal, VS Code, your Chrome browser. It allows so many different types of interactions. One of the great things about APIs is APIs will provide programmatic interface, but every interface is designed differently. And that is a challenge for developers. It creates the necessity to create mappings from tool A and tool B. For example, how many times have you worked in a sim and you realize that the IP address in your sim is incorrect? Maybe it's called IPv4 address. And then there's another field called IPv6 address. And then there's another field called IP address 2, because there's two IP address interfaces. The data mapping between APIs can be horrendous. With MCP, we all follow the same set of rules. There's tools, there's resources, there's prompts. These are the common paradigms of MCPs. I've been saying MCP server a lot, but what about the client? In the MCP protocol, there is a client and server relationship. The client is typically wherever you're sending the prompt from. The end user is using the MCP client. And a lot of times we don't necessarily realize that we're using an MCP client. ChatGPT is an MCP client. By using ChatGPT, whether it's the web application or the desktop application, MCP is built into it. In fact, there's some MCP server communication going on under the hood when ChatGPT is doing deep research or searching through your Google Drive or even searching the web. So far, there's been a massive adoption in Model Context Protocol. And I think it's for good reason. It's for good reason because this technology is going to change the world and it's going to change our lives in cybersecurity especially. This protocol just came out in November, and I am immediately taken back to my days of starting computer networking. If you look back at IP addresses or even IPv6, IPv6 is a new version of IP address. IPv6 came out in the 90s, and it wasn't until the late 2010s that we really pushed the wide-scale adoption of IPv6. Not only that, the adoption was slow, but the protocol implementation is even slower. There's many operating systems out there, including the ones that you and I are using, that don't have a full implementation of IPv6. There's missing features, and some of these features that are built into the protocol might help with security. And, it's because users don't necessarily need these features yet. Just because we don't need the feature doesn't mean that we shouldn't implement it or fully understand the protocol. I look at MCP the same way. With MCP servers, we're going to see a lot of breaches because a lot of people don't understand the protocol. They don't understand how to secure it quite yet. It's so new. Figma is a great example of that. Figma, they have an MCP server that is vulnerable through language prompts. Just imagine if Google search or your search bar on your website was vulnerable by someone typing hello. That used to be the case. That was how we found SQL injections, where you would put a quote or a semicolon, and then that would cause havoc in your web application. We're seeing something similar in MCPs. I think MCPs have inherent vulnerabilities because they're leveraging other applications after the language prompts and some very basic sanitization or parsing of information. I have one more example to show you the relationship between the past and the present. If you look at ICMP, the protocol that we all use for ping. Ping is one of the most used services across the internet. It's probably one of the highest amounts of traffic that we see across the internet. And there's still vulnerabilities within the ICMP protocol implementation on our operating systems. Every year, there's always an ICMP vulnerability. And it makes you wonder, is this a issue with the protocol itself, or is this an issue with the implementation? I think that's what we really need to get to the bottom of as security practitioners, is understanding the protocols, but also ensuring that there's a proper implementation. All right, so I pulled open my screen. If you're watching this video, then this is going to be really great for you, because I'm going to show you MCP setup and also one example of how to use an MCP server. So I have this tool called Raycast. Raycast is great. It's allows me to search through my file system a little bit quicker, and it also has AI tools built within it. So with Raycast, I'm going to let it know that I want to define a new MCP server called Chrome DevTools. Chrome was kind enough to create an MCP server that interacts with Google Chrome and allows developers to create and test their websites with a little bit more confidence. And with this MCP server, we can define whether we're going to use standard in and out. So this is, you could think of this as terminal-like input and output, or we could use HTTP. And this is also like giving me pause just by usability. Why is it HTTP, not HTTPS? What I think everyone should understand is, how is this data going out? HTTP means that you're going to a remote destination. It could be local area network, but it might be to the internet. So this is one of the things to keep in mind when you're integrating and configuring your MCP servers. So for my command, it's going to be running a shell command, MCP servers. It's going to be running this command npx. Npx is Node Package Manager. It's going to just grab this Chrome DevTools package. It's going to grab the latest package, and then it's going to run it. And then that's it. That is all the configuration to set up an MCP server, and Raycast is my MCP client. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask Chrome DevTools to open up LinkedIn. Open LinkedIn. Let's see how it does. And in a perfect world, whenever we run an MCP, we're going to get asked, are you sure that you want to do this? So we're going to go ahead and tell the AI, yes, we're sure. And for this MCP server tool calling, we're going to use GPT-4o Mini. This is probably not the right model to use. There's much newer models, but just for the sake of the example, we're going to go ahead and continue. So just like that, Google Chrome has popped up, and I'm now faced with a LinkedIn login screen. I'm excited by use cases like this. This was a very simple use case. You could use it to browse through LinkedIn. I could use it to sign in and message people. I like this approach much better than leaving it to the SaaS. Recently, ChatGPT released an agent feature, and it allows you to order things off of DoorDash, which means you got to enter in your credit card information and also your DoorDash credentials. I'm not necessarily too big of a fan of that paradigm. I'm more of a fan of running it locally, whether it be on my computer or even on my phone, and executing those tasks in a way that I could see and also intervene in if needed. If you're experimenting with vibe coding, or if you're deploying MCP enabled agents, you're part of this new age of cybersecurity, and you got to be wondering, what does that mean for all of us? It means that we've officially entered a new era, an era that we use vibe to describe, an era where AI agents can actually act and perform tasks on our behalf. It's going to be essential that as cybersecurity practitioners, we allow the AI agents to do the things that humans aren't necessarily the best at, like copying and pasting. I've seen so many times typos when there should have been copying and pasting, and copying and pasting when maybe you should not copy and paste because there's a typo from the original thing that you're copying. So we should be using agents to help us with action. There's a lot of resistance in cybersecurity at this very moment because we like to double check. Now, one of the things that we could do is use things like an OAuth flow or an authentication flow. Continuous authentication is going to be the way to give the AI agents the ability to act on our behalf, but to also provide that human in the loop step in the areas that we feel as though is necessary. If there's one thing that you can take away from today's episode, every new innovation capability deserves an equal amount of curiosity and caution. As creators, we need to learn how to vibe code responsibly, and that means knowing when to slow down, knowing when to audit, knowing when to add some friction, but it also means knowing when to step on the gas. And with that, I want to thank you for tuning into this episode of Hacker Valley Studio. If you enjoyed the episode, it would mean the world to us if you liked, subscribed, and shared the episode with someone that you think would enjoy it. And with that, we'll see everyone next time.